going to tell you a story, because that's what I do these days. When I first went to work in hospice, I'd been qualified for 5 years. I'd worked in wards where very sick people very frequently died. I'd worked in the regional cancer centre. I'd worked on a leukemia ward. So I'd seen a lot of dying, but generally my job was to be the girl who stopped the person dying, because that's what junior doctors are about. So when I first heard somebody who was a consultant in palliative medicine describing to a patient what dying was like, I was appalled that he was going to describe the process of dying to this lady. I was sitting on a footstool beside the bed as he was talking to her, and I kept thinking, this cannot be happening. You can't possibly tell somebody this. And what he described to her, he described because she was so afraid that she would die in agony, and if she died in agony, she would be separated forever from her husband, because he had died well and had said the prayers appropriately, and therefore he would be in heaven and she would despair and not get to heaven. So although this sounded as though it was a pain control conversation, it was actually an existential, it was one of the walls of the house that was falling down. And he said to her, would you like me to describe to you what dying is like? And I thought, what? And she said, oui, because she was French. She was a French resistance survivor, amazing woman. So he explained to her how it doesn't really matter what illness we're dying from. As we get towards the end of our life, we become more weary. And it seems to be some kind of metabolic thing that makes it more and more difficult for us to release sufficient energy from our metabolism to maintain our wakefulness. So it's not to do with drugs, although there are drugs that can make us a little bit sleepy when we're adjusting to them. It's about the process of dying. And that to recharge our energy, we need to sleep. And he said, well, you've probably noticed that you need a snooze during the day to recharge your energy. And she said, yes, I have. And he said, oh, that's good. And I thought, that's awkward. And he said, that's good, because that means you're following the normal pattern. So the next thing that we would expect to happen would be just that you'd be more tired, sleep more, be awake less, and we will continue to look after you. And then a time will come that you won't notice, but we will, when you're asleep and we want to wake you up. It might be medicine time, there might be a phone call, and we can't wake you up. This happens to everybody. The moment when we can't wake them up anymore. When they wake up later on, they tell us they've had a nice sleep. But we know they weren't just asleep. We know they were unconscious. We know they were in a coma. Do you want me to say that in French? And she said, no, I understand. So he said, as time goes by, people sleep more and more and dip in and out of unconsciousness. And at that point, we'll swap their drugs across from swallowing them, because we don't want you to be asleep at medicine time, miss the drugs, and then when you wake up again naturally, all your pain has come back, all your nausea has come back. So we swap the drugs then to injections, and we usually put them in a little pump so you get the right amount each hour. And then as time goes by, you just become more and more drowsy and lapse into unconsciousness. So when we're unconscious, that automatic breathing is cycles that are driven by the brainstem. Now, you're not thinking about your breathing at the moment, but now I've mentioned it, you are. But you are managing your breathing deliberately. You are breathing quietly so that you can listen to us, which is very kind of you. And we are managing our breathing so that we can take a sufficient breath not to be noisy into our microphones and then speak a sensible amount of words to make phrases to speak to you. So most of the time, we're subconsciously managing our breathing. Once we're completely unconscious, the breathing cycle goes between fast and slow and deep and shallow. And if we're not conscious at all, we won't feel the back of our throat. So we won't be monitoring whether our vocal cords are relaxed or tense. So many of you, obviously you don't snore yourselves, but many of you may sleep with snorers. Who are completely denying that they snore, yeah? Because they don't notice it. So this is a little bit akin to snoring, but it's actually the vocal cords. So people might make a noise that sounds a bit like as they breathe out. Now, if you didn't know otherwise, and that was your dad, you might think that he was groaning. So it's really, really important that we explain to you that that's a sign that he's deeply unconscious. And similarly, when the cycle comes around to being shallow, but a little bit faster, it could sound like panting. And it's really important that we explain to you around this bed that your mum is not breathless. She's actually doing automatic breathing because she's deeply unconscious. Now, the most sensitive part of our body is actually the very back of our throat. It's innervated by several different sensory nerves just to make sure that we can't possibly choke by accident. It's the bit that people tickle when they want to make themselves sick. Don't go there. If you're deeply unconscious, you might have saliva or you might have secretions coming up from your lungs that lie in the back of your throat. And because you're unconscious, it doesn't trigger the reflex that normally makes you just swallow. So that will happen all the time when you're asleep, and you'll just swallow it down. You won't tolerate it in the back of your throat. Or you'll cough and clear your throat. If you're so deeply unconscious that you can't even feel this most sensitive part of your body, then it will just lie there in a little pool. And as you breathe, the air coming in and out of your lungs will go through that pool of liquid. And it will bubble, and the bubbling clicks, and it sounds like a rattle, and we call it the death rattle. No, we don't, we call it the death rattle. And we even, because everybody around the bed is made so uncomfortable by the death rattle, we give injections to the person who isn't at all uncomfortable to dry up their saliva so that everybody else will feel better. I can't think of any other situation in medicine where we would do that. Where actually what I need to do is come in and say, that noise that your mum is making, this is the mechanism, and it tells me that she is so deeply unconscious, she's so completely relaxed, that she is not feeling the stimulus of fluid in the back of her throat. Your mum is okay. Your mum is dying safely. This is all right. I've had wonderful letters from people who've read this book, who have revisited deathbeds that they were traumatised by and understood what it was that they saw and heard. We need to know this. We should be comforting each other with this. This is really important.